Hello everyone, my name is Adrian Markish and I am the publisher and editor of ModernAnalyst.com, the premier online community for business analysts. I would like to welcome you to today's webinar titled How West Bend Used Process Mapping to Tap into New Insurance Markets. Today's featured speaker is Stacie Kenny, Senior Business Process Analyst with West Bend Mutual Insurance. Stacie will present for about 20 minutes, after which she will take your questions. So make sure to submit your questions in advance using the questions feature of the webinar software. I would also like to say thank you to Lombardi Software for sponsoring this event. They will be providing everyone who attended the webinar a free 30-day trial of Blueprint, Lombardi's process documentation and workflow diagramming tool. You'll be receiving an email next week with the details on how to access Blueprint. At this time, I would like to turn over to Stacie.
Well, welcome everyone to the presentation today, how West Bend uses process mapping to tap into new insurance markets. So the process story at West Bend here is really a success story in the making. So what we'll cover today is a little bit about who is West Bend, what was our process problem, why did we think BPM and process mapping could benefit us, how did we use BPM and process mapping? And then ultimately, what is our vision for process mapping? So let's start with who is West Bend? Well, over 100 years ago, a fire roared through West Bend, Wisconsin. This tragedy was one of the worst for the community and touched the lives of many people. Because of that fire, a company was formed, and even then we began to show that something good can come from something bad. That's what we like to call here the silver lining. We protect the assets of policyholders in Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, Indiana, and are expanding into Missouri this summer. We provide them property and casualty insurance for businesses, homes, autos, and personal property. West Bend has over 1,000 employees. Our strategy is to be the best in our market, which is the Midwest, providing property and casualty insurance services. As a result, we've experienced 73% growth in our policyholder surplus in the last 5 years, as well as a 47% rise in assets. Our mission is simply to provide peace of mind to our customers through sound insurance and legendary service. Kevin Steiner, our CEO, stated in an article featuring our recent corporate headquarters expansion that every year we make changes to improve our ability to react to the marketplace long term. Example, a current unprecedented investment in technology coming at a time in the insurance business cycle when premium pricing is down and it is difficult for companies to increase revenue. We are making these investments because we know that 2, 3, 4 years from now, they will pay off big time. So BPM is really one of those technology investments that Kevin was referring to in that statement, which has allowed us to explore process mapping. So what was our process problem here at West Bend? Well, we wanted our policy portfolio to include more small commercial policies to represent a bigger slice of the pie. We knew that we couldn't tap into this market with our current processes and underlying systems. Also, our current small commercial offering had become outdated and wasn't competitive when compared with others. Agents do not find writing small business very lucrative with our current new business processes. The application process is time-consuming. The premiums are small and thus their commissions are too. They have told us that they would prefer more of a once-and-done experience. Now, we already have a customer care center to handle the support of the policy for our agents, but that was only half of the once-and-done equation. The other half was a less timely and easier process for our agents to quote and submit an application for issue. Underwriters spend a lot of time working in various disparate systems. They manage agency communication via email, so whatever decisions or quote data that's agreed upon needs to be re-entered. They use a mainframe to manage their quote data. Underwriters also have to duplicate data in an antiquated workflow system using Word and Excel forms. Obviously, this is very timely, error-prone, and inefficient. Not to mention, we don't have access to the data that will help us improve the process or product. So why did we think BPM and process mapping could benefit us? Well, we knew we needed an agile solution that could adapt to change and do it quickly. When it comes to underwriting, it's all about guidelines or rules, by product, by state, etc. We needed our new process to allow an underwriter to react to decisions triggered by our rules engine. We are expecting these rules to continue to grow in numbers as well as become more refined. We also know that we want to replace our policy administration system in the near future, and with BPM, the process itself remains the same even though the integrations will change. Therefore, the effect on the user having to adopt yet another new system does not have to be endured because they are interacting with the process and not the system directly. This is where process mapping becomes essential. Now, the referral process during quoting needed to be fast and easy. Agency users requested immediate response on risks perceived to not be suitable for West Bend. So in a sense, they wanted to fail as fast as they could if they were going to fail. So when our rules prompt an agent because suitability is in question, they can choose to submit that directly to their underwriter. Now, the quoting to issue process needs to take less time, so essentially the commission needs to justify the time spent on that piece of new business. We expect turnaround to be in minutes versus hours or days, and we can allow for this turnaround because we've included escalation and delegation processes to handle tasks regardless of certain underwriters' availability. In doing so, we allow the agent to continue if risks are deemed suitable. Now, visibility is key in enabling the business to manage and improve upon this process. With the process, we can capture the communication and risk decision as data. This has allowed us to build a scoreboard showing risk acceptance in a variety of views key to our product management group. This, in turn, allows them to modify the rule or behavior of that rule when it's triggered. We've also set up notifications to drive management to this scoreboard when certain thresholds are met. So we knew that by abstracting the technology away from the end user and placing them in the process at the right time with the right data, that we could gain significant efficiencies in which we underwrite our new business today. Doing so, in addition with the new web application and rules engine, made the process a much shorter and more intelligent one than its predecessor. That's BPM and the advantage of process mapping. Now, how did we use BPM and process mapping for this original process problem that we had? Well, we leveraged both Teamworks and Blueprint. We started working right away in Teamworks on developing and continually refining the process. Teamworks is our business process management suite. One of the things that I really liked about it is that I can easily develop the user interfaces, which allow the end user to interact with the process. With traditional development technologies, this is difficult for a non-developer to do. So typically you have a BA mock something up and get buy-in from the business. That's then interpreted by a developer where the screen almost always looks a little different, and that can be a problem. It wasn't until we were halfway through development in Teamworks that we truly realized the benefits of also using Blueprint. It's one spot for all our documentation on the process, including screen captures. So it reads like a process flowing from start to end and not a dissection of an application into requirements, screens, reports, etc. The documentation is useful in many ways, such as training and reference material. If we didn't have this, we would be creating separate deliverables and managing the content across all of them, where ultimately they would become stale at some future point in time. I know, having been a BA, this has been a very frustrating point for myself during a project. I've also found that process mapping to be very useful in depicting each scenario as its own process. So if you have a complex process with a myriad of scenarios, isolating each scenario and offering a visual really helps the team to focus on a common understanding and allows you to set the expectations for what will happen with the given scenario. The documentation from all these scenarios can then be used as a point of reference by participants going forward. Now, the iterative process development was also key. We conducted formal playbacks every 4 to 6 weeks to make sure that we were building the process according to the business needs. At the early playbacks, we had to set the stage that the process they were about to see was probably wrong, and that was the reason for the playback. We wanted to show them what we had so far and get their reactions, good or bad. We also wanted to make sure that they would be comfortable bringing up questions and concerns early and often. The team worked very closely with the primary participant of the process on a daily basis. We adopted daily 15-minute sessions so that all the IT team members were always aware of what everyone was working on and where our priorities were. We also conducted weekly informal playbacks to review new features, ask questions, and discuss options. So moving forward with BPM, future projects here at West Bend will likely concentrate on a 3 to 4 month delivery of new or revised processes, using close collaboration with the business using process mapping, and include at least 3 formal playbacks. And before BPM and with our old workflow system, a business process took on average 12 to 18 months to deliver. Now, small commercial was just the beginning, and there are other phases of this product that we will continue to deliver in the coming months. However, the work we have completed with the project was transformational and has provided us the foundation to continue to build upon. We've already received requests from clients to leverage the BPM methodology and process mapping on future endeavors. They see the benefits of thinking more process-centric, and we are gaining back the confidence of our business to deliver effective solutions that will grow with their changing needs. An example of one project coming up that I'm really excited about and will be involved in is our automated underwriting. So we also used process mapping for our IT reorganization. Basically, the word got out, and IT decided to adopt process mapping for our Road to Excellence program. That's our nice name for an IT reorg. So our CIO wanted to reorganize our current structure because we were working in functional silos doing similar things slightly differently with different tool sets, which from his perspective was very hard to manage, rightly so. Process mapping was key in allowing each process team to concentrate on redesigning 1 or 2 processes where all stakeholders were represented, as well as the business process analyst mapping the process during each work session. Each team member took ownership of a certain part of the process outside of the session to further detail it, which was then reviewed by the team at the next session. Some of the team members that had not heard of Blueprint before were using it quite easily with a little help here and there. For these folks, now that they've used Blueprint and the practice of process mapping, they can't imagine not using it in the future for all of our processes. With these processes, we strove for 80-20, not perfection. As a result, we modeled 14 processes in 4 weeks, and implementation completed this February. This has prompted IT to adopt the concept of process ownership and assign an owner to each of the 14 processes. As our CIO and the directors have communicated to the IT division, this is a huge step on our road to excellence, and the processes are not perfect or set in stone, but should be continually examined and improved upon where needed. So what is our vision for process mapping here at West Bend? Well, what we're doing is targeting one enterprise process repository. So we're working toward managing all our enterprise processes inside Blueprint. We already have over 130 processes mapped since adopting Blueprint last July. My team is also working with our BCP team to maintain the linkage of each enterprise process to business continuity requirements. We're hoping to avoid the following situations with this process repository. No more asking the business repeatedly about their processes because we can leverage our growing repository. We've heard loud and clear on many occasions that our clients are tired of explaining their processes to maintenance, we expect the process maps will be kept up to date. Also, there will be no more digging around for past project documentation on the LAN or SharePoint sites. With IT employee turnover and consultants that come and go, we often do not have someone to go to for finding the right project documentation, unless, of course, you get lucky. Clients don't often know where our IT project documentation resides, nor should they have to in order to help us with our dig. So we have also started capturing process models early for every project. What we do is perform a high-level process map during project definition for all IT projects. So every project ends up with an as-is and a to-be process map. We further define the to-be process maps for all processes in a BPM project. We're expecting to leverage the process map as the primary BA deliverable. Managing the process and all the various exception paths, as well as the requirements, screen functionality, reports, etc., is much easier with the process map, especially with a tool like Blueprint. All the documentation is there, as well as the diagram, all together, kept as data to be served up however it needs to be. So it should be utilized for working with the design and development team, as well as providing training material to the business. In particular, these requirements can now leverage the context of the process itself, which offers more meaning to those consuming them and ultimately signing off on them. Reviewing the process map with the business is much easier than, say, a functional specification document because it flows like the process. I can say this personally because I tried to represent a process in a specification document, saw the errors of my ways, and once I embraced the process model, everything just made more sense and which was much easier to maintain. So in conclusion, BPM and process mapping has been well received here at West Bend and will become more and more essential for all our projects going forward. So are there any questions I could answer?
Stacie, we have a number of questions from our audience, and we'll start with the first one. First question is, which rules engine have you used for decisioning?
For decisioning, we're currently using InRule, and we've complemented that with Rule Express, where we start with our rule harvesting and fact modeling first.
Okay, the next question is, did you ever have any pushback when you were implementing the new leverage processes? And if so, how have you been able to handle this?
I think since process mapping is somewhat new to the organization, people are a little uncomfortable with it. So when I go in and work with new clients that I haven't before mapping out processes, I typically start from square one and I explain to them the process and why we're doing that, and allow them to feel a little uncomfortable at first, since it's definitely a new approach that they haven't seen exercised here before. So knowing that going into a process mapping session, I try to put them at ease right away, and typically by the end, they're very warm and very accepting to what we've ultimately created at the end of that session.
That's great. And related to the process mapping, another question is, what process mapping tools and methodologies do you use?
We're using Blueprint, and I have become quite an advocate for the tool. Just like I said in my presentation, having been a BA before, trying to manage the content that we continually define throughout the phase of a project is much easier in one spot where you can get at to it with several different views. So we're using Blueprint, and our BPM methodology is heavily revolved around the methodology that Lombardi has helped us define here. using playbacks as our delivery and requirements confirmation mechanism, if you will. We're also starting to really build up our skill set with Six Sigma. So we're trying to take all these tools and really use what works best here, given the project at hand.
Great. You mentioned earlier that you've used process mapping within the IT organization itself. Can you give an example of one of the 14 IT processes that you created, just to give a perspective?
Sure. We wanted to focus on the core IT processes, so it really starts with how do we accept work into IT. So there's this work intake and categorization process, and then we've also from that, if something is categorized as a project, which we have parameters defined to dictate that, we have a couple earlier phases of the project, defined being one of them, which is where we do our high-level process mapping, and then we one of the tail end of the processes is our release management process. So we got a lot of the work intake and a lot of the earlier phases of the project defined, as well as the release management process for those IT processes that I helped out on.
Great. Another great question is, what is the success model to move from a functional specification to BPM?
Haha, that's a good question. You know, it was challenging because having been a BA and working with something like a functional specification document, it's what you know, it's what you're used to, it's what you're comfortable with. So it's sometimes really hard to see, well, how do I use Blueprint? How do I use a process map to do all this? And it took me probably about 6 months to really come full circle on that. And like I said, it really took trying to take a process through a functional specification for me to see firsthand. I'm not one of those people that can just sit at a lecture and absorb what I need to and put it to action. I'm really the hands-on kind of person. So going through that exercise, I don't know if it would be necessary for everyone, but it was for me to fully envelop the benefits of using the process map instead of a functional design document.
And another related question is, what is the relationship between process mapping and functional specs at Westband? I mean, does the business use or validate specs at all, or validate the design?
What we're having them do is we're having them validate the process itself and all the details that we capture in the process. So we get down to the procedural level in the map, and that's why the process map is so great, because you can stay at a high level if you need to. There's a discovery map view where you can just kind of get a feel for the process, but you can totally build in the detail down to the nuts and bolts, and you can prescribe, you know, exactly what data elements you need for a particular activity and what output you're expecting. So there are just huge capacity from my perspective.
That's great. Let me answer a question. Now, there are a number of questions around the slides in the webinar and their comments. The webinar is very informative to most folks. They would like to see it again, and the answer is yes. You will be receiving an email within the next week with the links to where you can view the webinar again and download the slides, as well as information on how you can receive a 30-day trial to Blueprint. Now, let's move on to one of the next questions for Stacie. One question that stands out is, are you concerned that your documentation is not internal with you on your site, given the software as a service model, Blueprint?
No, I have no concerns. In fact, Lombardi came here recently to discuss the improvements that they're planning for their new revision in April. And I had our security architect present, as well as our IT audit and controls representative, and they really walked out of there with a few revisions that we're expecting, but no concerns really with the software as a service at all.
Great. There are a number of questions related to relationship between process mapping and use cases, specifically what is the relationship, and or is it process mapping same as use cases? Do you use both or not really?
Having been at a shop before as a BA that was heavily invested in UML, pretty well versed in use cases. Actually used a tool, I think it's by Spark Systems, Enterprise Architect, for creating context-level use case diagrams and the narrative around them. And I actually prefer the visual that a process map offers. And I think I touched on this in my presentation where I talked about if you have a very complex process, it's easier to consume that when you break them down into some key scenarios. So typically you would have a use case narrative that goes through all the possible exception paths, the happy path and all the exception paths. And I would create a process map for all the exception paths. And I actually did this on a project here recently. And the reception from the business was that the model is much easier to consume and react to versus a Word document filled with text.
Excellent. Two more related questions. One of them is, the first one is, how did you get buy-in from management to move to BPM, to a BPM tool? And related to that, what metrics did you use to determine success of the BPM solution?
You know, we have somewhat of a unique scenario here at West Bend with regard to establishing success before really fully enveloping BPM here. Actually, Teamworks and BPM and our rules decision management, those were all selected prior to my coming on board here. So I can't really speak to that process on how we got buy-in to go down that path. But what I can speak to is the reception here on our clients thinking more process-centric and really reaping the value of seeing things visually. That has been well received. Our process that we built is due to go live in 2 weeks, and so we haven't you know, had something in production where we've been able to capture those metrics and say, here, look, this is what we told you we were going to deliver, and here we have proof of it now. So we're not quite there yet, but that's why we're such a unique story, because our business has already seen the value without seeing the physical proof of it so far. So we're somewhat unique in that regard.
Great. Okay, let's take maybe 2 more questions as we're getting to the end of our session. But a couple questions related to the relationship between business analysts and BPM, specifically around have you seen productivity and throughput improvements on the side of the business analysis team as a result of this tool, and as the experience with the tool increased?
I have yet to train all our BAs here at West Bend on using Blueprint. The BAs that I have trained on Blueprint, they really like the tool. They like the concept of having all of their requirements and other information that they would ordinarily document in Word or Excel in one spot. that can, ultimately be delivered and reviewed quite easily with their business clients. But we're still working toward getting all the VAs on board with the tool and the methodology. We're not quite there yet. So I can't really speak to the effect it's had because we haven't quite fully enveloped that with all our VAs here just yet.
Great. Okay, and let's move on to perhaps the last question, or related questions related to BPM and requirements, documentation, and elicitation. Where in the chain or in the business process did you use BPM from a requirements documentation perspective? And also one more question related to the BAs and requirements is how long did it take, or would it take, you think, to train a BA on using Blueprint?
The training class that I offer is 2 hours. It includes lab and lecture. I know that Lombardi offers the webinar. I believe it's 2.5 hours. There was a new team member on our team that just came on board that actually went through that webinar.
Okay, I think we may have lost
because for every element in the process map, you have a structure that guides you on what you need to elicit from your business user.
Unmuted.
Especially if you're working on depicting a 2B, you want to make sure that you've captured, what is this activity responsible for doing? What does the activity mean? And then also, who do you expect to conduct this activity, as well as driving out what inputs does this activity consume, what are the expected outputs, and it's quite easy to sequence the activities if they're a little out of sequence. So I fully expect our BAs to use Blueprint to do that requirements capture.
Great. Thank you very much, Stacie, for a great presentation and great insight via your questions and answers. Again, thank you everyone for attending.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for attending this very informative webinar. As I mentioned earlier, you'll be receiving an email on how to access the 30-day trial of Blueprint, as well as links to the archived webinar for those of you who were not able to join us from the beginning, as well as the copy of the slides. Thank you again, and have a great day.